government for the kind hospitality, and I congratulate very much for such a big success and of this very important and also wonderful event. Well, and I just introduced as the professor of the university. Oh yes, I'm a university professor, but I'm rather new and in this academic world. And I have been more served as the government officer in the Japanese Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, and working Japanese Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, and working for the energy policy for almost 30 years. And the last 10 years, I've been mostly working for the new technology for the energy area and mostly for the renewable energies and also this hydrogen technology. So today my talk will be starting from the policy aspect of the hydrogen, then move on to the current highlights of the Japanese and hydrogen, on to the current highlights of the Japanese and hydrogen research and development program. So let me start with the policy aspect. Well, and this is the energy situation of Japan. And Japan has rather a vulnerable energy supply system. And as a matter of fact, Japan depending on the import of the energy supply at almost 80%, and which is quite high number compared to other countries. And that's why energy security has long been a very high issue for Japanese national energy policy. The government has taken every necessary efforts to diversify its energy sources. Since the 1970s, the nuclear was the key contributor to increase the energy security. But well, as you know, that in 2011 and after the Fukushima accident, now Japanese government has to change their policy to rely not just the nuclear but also on the renewable energy. So now nuclear and renewable both are key contributors in Japanese energy system. Feed-in tariff was introduced as well in 2012, and now the Japanese renewable has increased. It was only the 1% in 2010, but in 2016 it's already at 7% the share they have. So, and Japanese energy supply mixture is changing very rapidly. I mean that the energy transition is underway in Japanese energy system. So, I see that there are three key drivers for Japan to move for the hydrogen as the main contributor in the energy system. Firstly, because it is green energy. Hydrogen releases no carbon dioxide in combustion, and further it can be converted to electricity with high efficiency in case of nuclear fuel cells. Secondly, hydrogen can be produced from various primary energy sources, including not just the clean renewable and also the rather dirty fossil fuels. And further, hydrogen can be used in many energy demand areas, covering power generation, transportation, and also even the residential energy sector. So we believe that the hydrogen is very useful in giving a higher flexibility in energy system, and particularly in the energy supply chain, that now energy transition is very rapidly underway here in Japan. The third reason that Japan pursued hydrogen society is its long experience in hydrogen-related research and development activities, including the commercial scale of the fuel cell system. In addition, Japan has long, strong industrial basis for developing hydrogen business. I mean, the automotive and also the material industry. This will be a very good basis for Japan to develop a new eco-friendly industry. So, then I would like to introduce briefly about some achievements in Japanese hydrogen development. Firstly is the stationary fuel cell combined heat and power system, ENEFON. ENEFON is the 712 watt BESC type fuel cell system for household. It is fueled by city gas, I mean natural gas, and also LPG. This has been commercially sold since 2009, and since then more than 250, well, it was an old figure. Now the latest number is 270 units have already set and installed in ordinary households. The price of the ENEFOS was high in its beginning. It's almost only 3 million yen when the first time it was installed. But thanks to the economy of scale, now price has dramatically reduced, and now it's almost 1/3 of the original price. Second achievement is the fuel cell vehicle and also the hydrogen refueling station. As already known, Toyota has released its first FCEV Mirai in December 2014. Then Honda Clarity followed 6 months later. Up to now, more than 2,500 vehicles already on the road. With regard to the refueling station, and 100 stations have already started operation, and covering major cities like Tokyo, Nagoya, Osaka, and Fukuoka. Currently, more than 2,500 FCEVs are already running around the streets. But this is not yet enough to make the 100 refueling station program. Therefore, some kind of financial assistance will be necessary to make such kind of the refueling station to continue the business. Recently, a hydrogen refueling station operator, car companies, and also some investment funds jointly established a company to support HRS business, and the name of that company is H2 Mobility. This company is helping to support the financial and assistance to the station that was funded by the government. Not just to mention the two major achievements, the Japanese government has been continuing efforts to expand the H2 applications. Firstly, developing SOFC for further commercial use, then for the mobility. Mirai technology has applied to commercial bus and trucks, and the forklift that will contribute to increase the contribution of hydrogen in energy system, and also generating more hydrogen demand. That may help lowering the price of the hydrogen. Well, based on this achievement, recently the Japanese government released the national hydrogen strategy, and so I would like to talk a little bit about this strategy. So, as previously stated, hydrogen is regarded as the key contributor to resolve the various problems Japan has in its energy system. Given this, the Japanese government adopted its first and probably first of this kind in the world national hydrogen strategy in December 2017. This strategy sets targets of the H2 market and its price in 2050 For example, target price of the hydrogen in 2050 is set at $2 per kilogram, which is almost less than the 1/5 of as of today. The national hydrogen strategy also sets the future target of the key elements of hydrogen development. For example, the target of the hydrogen demand is set to 5 to 10 million tons per year, that's currently only 200. Hydrogen power generation cost is set to 12 yen per kilowatt hour, and which is quite comparable with the current thermal generation cost. With regard to the mobility, the number of registered vehicles will be expanded to 800,000 in 2030 from 2,500 as of now. In order to achieve these set targets, Japanese Ministry METI has taken initiative to set rather aggressive budget allocation to hydrogen. The total amount of H2 budget for 2018 is 28.4 billion Japanese yen, which is almost 260 million US dollars. Well, some are going to the vehicle subsidies and station subsidies, but I would like to highlight that more than half is going for the research and development activities, which is managed by the sub-governmental organization NEDO. So, I would like to talk a little bit about the highlight of the NEDO Research and Development Program for the 2018. Well, there are four main pillars of the NEDO Research and Development Program. Firstly, is fuel cells, both covering for the PEFC and also the SOFC. Then hydrogen refueling station. Third one is the hydrogen supply chain and also the hydrogen fueled gas turbine technology. The fourth one is the power to gas. I would like to explain a little bit about each item that the following slide. First one for the research and development for the PEFC. For the PEFC R&D, never focus on the very basic research, aiming at accelerating new material development, particularly in the industry side. One of our research subjects is the analytical technology for PFC reaction mechanism. We have succeeded in visualizing the phenomenon in PEFC anode catalyst degradation and the water generation and also the distribution. Other subjects are developing evaluation protocol that is used to see the 50,000 hours lifetime, and also developing a new material design concept to reduce platinum, which is quite costly, and also improving the lifetime. With regards to the SOFC fuel cell, and our target of is the little bit bigger type of SOFC than the NFR. Now, 20 to 50 kilowatt models are under demonstration, and they are already showing the over 50% of the power efficiency. Well, in the course of the realizing the hydrogen society, our next step after the NFR and also the extra power generation. And we see that it generates the far bigger hydrogen demand than the vehicles, hence contribute to the expand the hydrogen market and then bring the hydrogen price down. In this presentation, we have been promoting the hydrogen fueled gas turbine. Currently, the basic research is ongoing to modify the combustible gas turbine for the hydrogen burning. Combustion of hydrogen in air generate high density of NOx oxides. So technology is necessary to reduce the generation of such a nitrogen oxide. Further demonstration project has been ongoing since last December. This is the cogeneration system using hydrogen gas turbine. This has been operating since last December. Firstly, they are using the hydrogen natural gas mixture fuel, but they are trying to improve, to increase the portion of the hydrogen. And last May, finally, they achieved to continue the operation with pure hydrogen fuel, which means the completely clean summer power generation. Well, for the further expansion of the hydrogen power generation, we also have to think about the sufficient supply of the hydrogen for such a big demand. So, with this regard, Japan has been conducting a demonstration project between the Asia-Pacific countries. One is the Japan-Australia hydrogen supply chain project. Hydrogen is produced from the brown coal in Victoria, Australia, and then cooled to the liquid hydrogen, then shipped to Japan. For this demonstration project, first ship cargo is expected to arrive in Japan sometime in 2020. Another project is with Brunei. Hydrogen produced in the LNG plant is transformed to the methyl cyclohexane MCH, which is the kind of a chemical hydride, and then shipped to Japan. This method has an advantage that the MCH is, can be transported in the normal condition, I mean in room temperature and also the atmospheric pressure. So these both projects are expecting that about starting supply and the hydrogen from the outside Japan into Japan in sometime in 2020, and we hope that this will be expanded to the can be a major source of the hydrogen supply. Well, hydrogen is very good for the long time storage of electric energy and compared to the lithium type battery. So there is a challenge to use this hydrogen for the energy storage, particularly stabilizing the variable output of the renewable energies. That is called power to gas. There is a project is ongoing in a water purification plant that has PV and 24 kilowatt electrolysis and also the capacitor. This resulted in the increasing the capacity factor of the PV and also to provide backup power supply in case of an energy emergency in this purification plant. Another big project is a Fukushima hydrogen research field project. This project is producing the hydrogen from 10 megawatt of the solar system in Fukushima. Then generated hydrogen is going to be transported to Tokyo to supply for the 2020 Tokyo Olympic Game. And that is quite a big contribution to make that Olympic Game really green and even. To realize such kind of the power to gas project and electrolyzer will be the very key technology, particularly in the big size of the electrolyzer. So another project is ongoing to develop a new type of the electrolysis that can be used under various input current. So this is the almost the outline of the Japanese and hydrogen research and development, and particularly ongoing this year. So I would like to summarize my speech today. So first, hydrogen is the key contributor of Japan to achieve both energy security and also the environmental goals. In Japanese experience, and hydrogen use case has developed not simultaneously but at a step-by-step basis, starting from the stationary fuel cell cogeneration system for the household, then fuel cell vehicle and hydrogen refueling station. Now we are moving on to the next step, to the hydrogen-fueled thermal generation, together with the global hydrogen supply chain. To realize the hydrogen society, R&D, continuous research and development and efforts is necessary. We see that the two major challenges are reducing the hydrogen cost and also the expand the application that generates the hydrogen demand. I think that these points are not very unique to Japan, but also can be shared with Korea and also China and other countries who are seeking for the hydrogen society. So we see that this is not yet rather the competition, but in the area of cooperation. Well, in the beginning, I was introduced. I was quite happily served as the chair of the International Partnership of Hydrogen in the Economy. And I was successfully completed my 2-year task as the chair of the international forum. But that was heavily depending on the support from the international colleague, particularly Professor Mao from the Tsinghua University, and also Professor Shu in the Yonsei University. And that kind of a model will quite work good in this area. So I would like to continue the dialogue with you and also your industry people, and then try to accelerate the realize of the hydrogen society as soon as possible. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Professor. 일본의 여러 가지 현황들을 보고 현황 등등 저희로서 참 부러운 점이 많죠. 무엇보다도 지금은 일본에서는 똑같하게 30년 동안 수소를 기술해왔고 이제는 추수를 할 때다라는 그런 느낌이 많이 와닿습니다. 그래서 우리가 지금 현재 수소 사회를 위한 여러 가지 정책이나 그게 부응을 하고 있는데 이런 것이 굉장히 좋지만은 일본처럼 한 30년 이상 계속 지속됐으면 하는 바람이 있습니다. 그다음에 또 하나 저희가 이제 개인적으로 봤을 때 우리하고 일본하고 비슷한 나라에서 지금 수소를 우리나라가 수소를 수입한다는 생각을 하고 있을 텐데 일본은 호주에서 수소를 하고 그다음에 브루나이에서 일종의 에코스는 아니지만 리퀴드 수소가 되는 오가닉 수소를 수입하는 큰 것을 생각을 자체가 우리도 한번 생각을 피고 있지 않을까 싶고요. 질문이 많을 거 생각이 드는데 질문이 직원들 스태프들한테 쭉 주시게 되면 일단 다음에 시간을 갖도록 하겠습니다. 네, 다음은 하이드로전 퓨얼셀에 있는 알프레드 미스터 알프레드 웡께서 지금 캐나다에 바라드를 이식을 해가지고 그쪽에 관련된 기술들을 설명을 해주시겠습니다. 모두 큰 박수로 알프레드 웡을 맞으시길 고맙겠습니다.
For the introduction. First of all, I want to thank the organizers again. Thank you for the local government as well as the event organizers for putting on such a well-organized event. It's very good to be here. So today's presentation, I do want to talk a little bit about what we've done at Ballard as a company to drive the industry forward. But more than that, I want to talk about, what are some of the things that we can do together? Because what we really need to do is to have a true disruption in really pushing this technology forward. And I want to go back to first talk about, a founder, the late Dr. Jeffrey Ballard, who kind of gave this famous statement in one of his Time magazine interviews. What he said was that it would take a combined effort of academia, government, and industry to bring change from a gasoline economy to a hydrogen economy. So, at Ballard now, we're approaching our 40th year in business next year. We've now been in business for 39 years. And over that whole period, this statement has really been true. And now, more than ever, is a time that we really need to come together to make this happen. So a little bit about Ballard as a company. We've been in the business in fuel cells now for 39 years. In 2017, our revenue was 121 US million. We do have about 600 employees worldwide. Been listed now on the Toronto Stock Exchange for about 25 years. And of that 600 people, most of it, about more than 2/3 are based in Canada. And we've also got the remaining staff in operating centers in both Europe and in China and also in the United States. So before I go on, just again, at Ballard, we are a Canadian company, born in Canada, and in the early stages, this has really helped us move along in terms of helping us to position ourselves as a technology leader. So in 2017, the Global Clean Tech Initiative actually ranked Canada first in terms of within the G20 countries in terms of innovation. So we do have a really diverse and highly skilled talent pool. We do have competitive tax rates and incentives and a really strong business environment for us to foster. So as a private company, having this support has been extremely helpful. Also here with me today, we actually have our Canadian Trade Commission here. So I want to actually introduce, hello, Ms. Yi, Andrew, who's here as a Trade Commissioner. And if there's any questions that you have about Canada, I should be happy to answer them for you. Also want to talk a little bit about the association that we're under, the CHFCA, the Canadian Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Association. It's again as a new industry, it's really difficult to be heard, on a standalone in this new space without a collaborative voice, and that's what CHFCA has done for us. So next year, CHFCA will be hosting the annual or every biannual meeting in Vancouver. So again, hope that we'll be able to visit some of the participants here at the show in Canada next year. So just going back to the overall topic on why we're all here. One of the key things that we're addressing today collectively is climate change. So this has been a big debate by different government, different policymakers. In COP21 in Paris a couple of years ago, there was a big agreement signed between 196 countries. So if you talk to different leaders in this world, perhaps aside from President Trump, what you will get is the number one concern of our time today is climate change and climate crisis. So, this actually hit me personally pretty hard at a level. So I spent 30 years in Canada, but as part of working at Ballard a year ago, I moved, and now I currently live in Hong Kong. And, this is a picture that my wife actually took of the front door when the typhoon came through. And this is a 3/8-inch glass door, that outside the house. And, this is not just the only damage, but the whole city was completely torn apart, by this typhoon. And they said that it was the strongest typhoon to ever hit the city. So we're actually, we're not just reading about it, but we're starting to feel it. And if you look at the overall costs of climate change to the economy, in China, just one of the stats I pulled up from the newspaper, it was 267 billion yuan on climate change and air pollution problems. That's what's costing the economy. So really, to move forward, we really need to look at decarbonization, and I think this has been a theme that's been talked about a lot. And to do that, we really need to have a full, complete hydrogen economy in order to achieve that. So again, we're in a stage where we're trying to introduce disruptive technology. And I do want to bring you back to some of the kind of the history. I think Dr. Ann earlier talked about the shift of the revolutions from industrial revolution and the auto revolution. So if you look at the picture in 1900 in New York City, where's the car? We're at a time where it was a street of horses and buggies, and there was only one car. And if you look at 13 years later, where's the horse? So disruption happens quickly, the auto revolution really had only taken 13 years. Now we're at a time of globalization, we're at a time of digitization, where everything happens much faster. And I'm going to show you some other examples of that as well. If you look back at some of these experiences, we know that the hydrogen industry is going to move at about the same pace. So, at every disruptive event, there are winners and losers. So I want to bring you to a case where a few years ago, you look at a company like Kodak, a Fortune 100 company. In 1996, it had a $28 billion market cap. It was one of the top companies in the digital media space, or in the media, or in the digital, in the photography space. They actually had digital technology inside, which they didn't want to bring to market. And you look at what happened in 2012. A $28 billion company from 140,000 employees going bankrupt in a very short period of time. And why was that? Because of disruption from companies in social media, like Instagram, which became one of the great unicorn stories of the time. And you also look at a company like Blockbuster, and Netflix. So I'm not sure, if all of you guys are familiar with Blockbuster is the largest U.S. retail chain of video rentals. And if you look at one of the quotes that was quoted by the CEO in 2008 when business was slowing down, in one of the quotes, he said that Netflix was not on the radar screen of their competitor, on their competition list, but yet, in a matter of years, we've seen Blockbuster go out of business and Netflix going to a multi-billion-dollar valuation. So again, these are things that happen quickly, and these are things that we need to be ready for. So if you look at what transportation's looked like in the past decade, mainly powered by diesel, mainly powered by gasoline, very much it could look, transportation could look like this in a decade, or it could look completely different. And if you look at what the road is going to be like, with thousands of vehicles cramming through highways, many years later, or a few years later, it could be similar, or it could look completely different because of digitization and the way we're moving with new energy. So I think one of the key messages that we want to bring forward is we as an industry just need to move forward with this together. Things are changing, and we can't be caught doing things the old ways over and over again. So now at Ballard, one of our big focus as a company is to look at how we can disrupt the automotive and also to disrupt the way that transportation is being seen today. So earlier we talked about climate change, decarbonization, and transportation currently accounts for a very large portion of that. More than 50% of the carbon emissions today come from transportation. So you cannot completely decarbonize without addressing the transportation sector. So we're already seeing that the electric drive being introduced. So we know that the automotive industry is changing. And one of the key messages that, when we go out to, automotive trade shows and listen to the automotive forums, one of the key messages that we try to promote is that battery electric and fuel cell electric technologies are actually complementary. So we're not really trying to compete, to remove battery electric, but it's really look at how to bring them together and use them in the most efficient way possible and to utilize the benefits of both. So again, like I said before, we really do need to have this fuel cell technology commercialized in order to decarbonize our transportation sector. So there are really 5 things that at Ballard we want to look at together with the rest of industry to really look at how we can drive this transition. So the first one, and this is one that Ballard is currently doing a lot of, is to continue to invest in technology development to improve product performance and costs. So, if you look at, again, you look at some of the trends of the past from the solar industry and the wind industry, and you look at the annual production of where things were from 10 years ago. Right now, fuel cells is pretty much trending in very similar trends as what solar and wind are doing. So we're really moving in the right direction. Now, we really believe that the fuel cell cost is going to really scale with the cost is really going to come down with scale. So another slide that I actually found interesting, I'm sorry this is not in here, I just put this in here today. If you look at this is a report that I read on the Green Energy Congress and the U.S. Department of Energy. In 2002, they projected that the solar energy market would grow by about 1 gigawatt per year by 2010. So this is something that came out in 2002 that wanted to look at what would happen in 2010. By the time 2010 came around, that actual number was 17 times larger than what the US DOE had anticipated. If you fast forward to today, in 2018, this number is actually from 2017, the actual number from the forecast was 73 times larger. Okay? So if you look at just the overall kind of the production forecast and the cost curve, we really could be in the midst of something very special. And again, I apologize that this slide may not be clear to those in the back, but this shows that over the past 2 decades, the cost of solar cell production, the fall of the price, 1976, $80 a watt, to a few years ago, 60 cents, something from $80 to 60 cents. And now we're talking about reaching about, even lower than that at this point. So of the 5 points, I just want to go back. Number 2, I think the other thing that we think we need to do together is to work together to industrialize the electric powertrain. So again, in the fuel cell space, there's a lot of various different companies doing different things, but at the end, it all needs to work together. So that's going to be one of the strong focus going forward is how do we get the fuel cell to work together with the powertrain, to work together with the other auxiliary components and the vehicle drives and the hydrogen tank to get a complete optimized system. That's very important. Number 3, another important thing that we feel we need to do is to prioritize the heavy and medium duty motive market. And we say this because this is where, when we've looked at some of the studies on where fuel cells kind of make the most sense and has the highest value proposition, is in these heavy duty vehicles. So I want to bring you guys to this slide, which is actually from the Hydrogen Council report of 2017. So it's a very simple slide, but it's actually a very powerful graphics. And it really shows you that where the fuel cell opportunity lies. So if you look at the y-axis, where the heavy, look at the gross tonnage, or the weight of the vehicle, and also the length of the trip. Where fuel cells are going to make sense the most, it's in heavy, where you have to carry heavy payloads, where you cannot utilize on batteries, and you have to drive a very long range, so you do not have time to charge your car like you would in a traditional battery vehicle. So if you look at where kind of electric vehicles make sense, it's really, in applications where people are driving them to work in the morning, can park them to charge at night, or while they're at work, and to come home in the evening, or also charge them, when they're sleeping. But one of the mega trends that we're seeing in the automotive industry is the move towards digitization and car sharing. So, I'm not sure about the situation in Korea, but myself, now I personally, after having owned a vehicle for 25 years, I don't have a vehicle today. When I need a car, I take out my iPhone and I call Uber or Didi and I order a vehicle. So I think this is a trend that we're going to see moving forward in a very major way, and that people are going to use these assets and be able to treat them as services rather than purchase them. So we see this in Airbnb, we're seeing this in other industries. But going forward, if private vehicles are going to be used for services, they're not going to have time to charge at stations. Operators are going to need their cars to run 600 kilometers a day, 800 kilometers, 1,000 kilometers, in which case batteries will not be able to satisfy those use cases. So, as we move forward, it's not just about an environmental issue, it's really about how people would change their behavior, and we're going to need technology to satisfy that, and fuel cells allow us to do that. So again, if you look at this, more carefully, the bubble size represents the market size of this. And so if we look at just automotive, going from small cars, just from private cars to more of a shared car mobility model, where people need to drive longer range, and as well as look at kind of more the heavy duty applications where they have to carry heavy payloads and cannot bring batteries along. What you ultimately see is that you'll see the market for fuel cells. It's actually larger than that of the electric battery. And I think, this is really what gives us promise as we move forward, and that one day, we will potentially see more fuel cell vehicles on the road than we do electric cars. My fourth point that I want to talk about is getting hydrogen costs down to parity with diesel. We talked about earlier about the different forms of fuel production, whether it comes from renewables or from coal, and how it gets distributed and also stored. But one of the things that's driving the business case for fuel cells is the cost of the fuel. So one of the things that I think it's not that apparent to many regulators and policymakers is that there's actually a lot of hidden costs in the production of traditional fuels, of carbon-based fuels. So you're talking about diesel and gasoline. So again, this is another article that I found and I read about. If you look at how much countries like the U.S. spends on defending the global oil supply, and again, I apologize that this slide is not in here, but the United States spends $81 billion per year on their Navy and to really protect the oil pipelines and the routes that deliver fuel to end users to maintain the current way of life. So a lot of this cost is actually not embedded in the price of gasoline, because when you're paying for gasoline or you're paying for diesel, you're really paying the companies for the price of producing, delivering, and storing and distributing the fuel. But there's another layer of government cost behind it that is very large that the consumers that doesn't see. And again, this is when we move towards a hydrogen society, we need to be looking at things from at a parity level to compare apples to apples. And lastly, just on a very related note, currently a lot of the hydrogen supply that it's currently being produced and that's currently being used for various applications are currently coming from natural gas and methanol, and in some cases coal. But as we move forward, to really achieve a completely zero emission decarbonized world, we're going to need to step up increase the production of green hydrogen. So we looked at a few slides ago the trend of where solar cost is going, where wind cost is going, and there's going to come a day when we're going to have enough capacity in both wind and solar to be able to use that for both just our standard stationary energy needs, but as well as using the excessive energy from those renewables to make fuel that can be used in transportation. So again, it's really important that as an industry we drive towards that overall direction. So, with all that said, where are we going to see, the applications of fuel cells? So, for us, if we can do those things together, those 5 things, what we envision is that in the future, we're going to get buses running on fuel cells that have very long range, fast refueling, have great route flexibility. We believe that we're going to see long routes with heavy payloads in trucks, in these long haul trucks. So at Ballard, we're now working in California and with Kenworth to demonstrate this. We're also going to see rail electrification without catenary wire. So when cities go about and build their rail, we're going to see that they're not going to have these ugly electric lines running on top of their cities, that they're going to be able to be powered by fuel cells. And we're going to see that the ports that cruise ships go into are going to be completely emission-free. So again, this is at Ballard, we're doing a project with Royal Caribbean to try to demonstrate this. Ports are currently one of the biggest emitters of carbon when they come to dock. So another big opportunity for us to really work together to resolve the current issues. And we talked about, earlier speakers talked about forklifts before. So again, enable us to work with higher productivity, to not have to change out batteries, and also fuel cells will allow us to use to put fuel cells in UAV applications, in drones. So we heard the presentation this morning about how with fuel cells you can enable 2-hour runtime rather than 30-minute runtime. Again, opening up brand new application space, allowing us to use autonomous vehicle and ride sharing, which we touched on earlier. So again, many different things that I think if we achieve all the stuff that we talked about, will enable a whole new economy. And I just want to finish with this one last slide. In the Hydrogen Council in 2017 published a possible outlook for what hydrogen mobility will be like in 2030. And they called for about 500,000 trucks, a handful of trains, a few thousand buses, and first hydrogen-powered cruise ship. But if you look at history, look at some of the trends that we've talked about, what happened in solar, what happened in EV, what happened in battery, it is our true belief that we're going to really blow by these numbers. So, we've got about 12 years to do that. At Valak, we think we're going to well surpass these numbers, and we really hope that we can work with the rest of the industry, with Korea and the rest of the world to achieve that. Thank you very much.
하나 국제적으로 퓨얼셀 쪽을 끌고 가고 있는데 발라드의 입장에서 상당히 그 현실적인 어떤 방향과 문제들이 좀 나오는 것 같고 그때 기업 입장에서는 맞지 않나 생각합니다. 가장 인상적인 것이 아마 기재와 같이 값을 그 정도로 되면은 그게 모든 아마 수소 쪽에 연구를 하시든 아니면 산업체 쪽으로 관계를 하시든 그게 아마 거의 최종의 목적이 아닐까 생각합니다.
This is one of our end goal, or one of the medium to help us get to the end goal faster. So we now have one speaker left, team leader Park Yong-sun from Korea University as final speaker for session 1. He has been a researcher in this industry for a long time, and since 2016 he has been leading the fuel cell system test team. So I will now invite Mr. Park Yong-sun to deliver his presentation. Please greet him with a big round of applause. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. As introduced, my name is Park Yong-sun from Hyundai Motor Group. I feel very humbled to present after a representative from Ballot, and I have something that popped into mind. Vice President Lee mentioned that since 1998, Hyundai has been researching into hydrogen, and I joined the team in 2002. And back then, there was very little awareness and little technologies on fuel cells back in the days. So I went to Ballot as a business trip, and I learned how to drive one of their cars. I went through a week of training, so it was a very memorable experience. People asked me where I was from, South or North Korea, and I was so taken aback. I was like, oh, the global community knows so little about South Korea, and I think almost 15 years has passed since then, and there was a emergency battery, a 1 kilowatt battery, and there was a sudden power outage at the office because I couldn't turn on my computer. So I connected their battery, Ballot's battery, to my computer, and then I could reboot it. So I felt that it was a very advanced company, and we also signed a contract with UTC and started to use their technologies, which brought us to where we are now. And one thing that also popped to mind was that there was a large-scale fuel cell seminar held in the United States, and I went there very often. And one time, if I would report back to my boss after the seminar, I would say something like this: it was very surprising to see something I've always had in my head in front of my eyes. And sometimes my boss will pressure me to work even harder since I have learned from such advanced use cases. So the employees of Hyundai has been committed to the relevant R&D, and I think that's why Hyundai now is at a very leading position in the industry. So I would like to talk about the technology trends and ways in which Chungnam companies can participate. So I'm sure all of you are aware of what's on this slide. Fuel economy regulations are tightening, and there is policies to support purchases for zero-emission cars and new energy cars. So I looked up the Ionic hybrid car and I saw that there was 59 mpgs and the hydrogen cars were around 35 mpgs. The regulation is set at 56, which means that we all have to ride the Ionic model. And this is a big challenge for the motor industry in the whole. And in the case of the United States, Tucson or other small-scale SUVs popular in Europe emit around 160 mpgs. So we are going through many challenges in order to meet the regulations of these countries, and motor companies are going through more and more difficulties in making ends meet. So that's why we're investing in the latest technologies. The goal for zero-emission cars is for motor companies, they have an obligated amount of zero-emission vehicles for them to sell. And companies feel mandated to invest in eco-friendly cars. And Volvo, Volkswagen, and other well-known motor brands are investing into EVs. And Toyota made it clear that their goal is to bring the sales of gasoline engine cars to zero by 2050. And Hyundai Motor Group is trying to launch 31 cars, eco-friendly cars, by 2020, and one we newly released this year. So this part, it was very much covered earlier on, so I'll just skip this part. Hyundai Kia Motor Group is focused on many areas. First of all, we're trying to increase the efficiency of gasoline and diesel-fueled cars so that they'll be more affordable and emit less CO2. And also, we are working to develop hybrid models, such as Ionic. So we're trying to branch out to some specific special vehicle models, and we used to use the metal frames for Tucson for other vehicles, but now we're trying to come up with a tailor-made engine for fuel cell economic vehicles as well. So we are committed to developing new green technologies. This is the history of hydrogen car development in Hyundai Motor Group. So until 2002, we stacked the 75 kilowatts model device in the Santa Fe. And we imported most of the components from the US, and we were able to join the California Fuel Cell Partnership using this model, which allowed us to operate Tucson for 3 years. And a couple years later, we signed a contract with UTC, and we also imported a 80 kilowatt stack, and using that stack we did trial runs in the domestic front in the domestic market, cooled during the summer and winter season. So over the 7 years we learned a lot internally, and we also brought some technologies into Korea, and we finally succeeded in domestically manufacturing an 80 kilowatt stack in 2005, and we connected 2 stacks to develop a bus, and we supplied it for the German World Cup in 2008. And then next goal was to increase the power to 100 kilowatts, and we also upgraded the bus so that it could be used as shuttle buses in Incheon City and so on. And in 2008, before that, we installed the stack in the engine, but after that, we started to install the stack underneath the driver's seat. So you can see here the picture, one of the cars that we developed back then, and we drove it to San Francisco and took this photo as to commemorate the success. And before that, across the decade, we almost had a cumulative mileage of 1 million kilometers of all the vehicles that we developed. And based on that experience, we made Tucson from 2013 to 2017, and we not only consume it domestically, but export it to the US and the European countries. I think around 15% of the total production volume is bought domestically because of the price. And in 2018, we finally produced the 95 kilowatt Nexo. It's actually displayed outside, and many people think highly of this vehicle, and our goal is to upgrade it even further. So I believe the issue of safety has been brought up a number of times today. We consider safety as a very important priority, although it is for all vehicles. There is a separate law that governs hydrogen cars aside from typical cars. So these cars have to be certified by a authority. So Tucson and Nexo were certified by a Canadian institution, and they were also certified by German organizations. So the certification involves firearm tests, airtight tests, drop tests, heat tests, fire tests, and pressure tests. So we set the margin at more than a twofold to make sure that it does not blow up or does not catch fire. So you can be reassured that the hydrogen tank is completely safe. Can we turn on this video, please? If you click the picture, you'll be able to play the video. You have to click it with I don't think it's working, so I'll just explain it myself. So this was a test that we did with a gasoline car and an LPG car and Tucson. We did the test at a military facility because we can't do it in a residential area. People think that the car is going to blow up very loudly, but the fact of the matter is there is a safety valve. So if there is a fire and the temperature goes over 100 degrees Celsius, there is this part of the valve that melts, and through that void, the hydrogen is emitted. So there's only a flame, a certain amount of flame, just like when you smoke. Just like if I turn my lighter on, it doesn't explode. You can only see the flame. It's the same thing that's going on with this tank. So even if the car itself is completely burned, the tank is left intact. Even if the cover may be burned or detached, the body of the tank is left as it is. We installed the tank on a gasoline car and an LPG car and did the fire test. And we could see that the fire went off earlier, and the hydrogen car wasn't as burned as the other cars. Because gasoline cars or diesel cars, if the tank melts, the gasoline or diesel, it leaks, and the car burns until all of these fuels are burned up. But in the case of hydrogen cars, once all of the hydrogen is let out, there's nothing that can keep the fire going. So the fire it kind of dies down earlier than the other cars. And we also did crash tests. I understand there was media coverage on Tesla's crash test once. The car crashed into a tree, but they couldn't open the door because they might get electrocuted. So the car is very high voltage cars, 200 volts at minimum. So if there is this electricity going through in the entire car frame, if someone tries to save the passenger by opening the door from outside, they might get electrocuted. So we did 3 different tests: frontal crash tests, rear crash tests, and side crash tests. And in all 3 tests, there had to be no leakage of hydrogen, and all of the electricity has to go through one outlet to make sure that nobody is electrocuted. So when we make these cars, we do these types of crash tests. And as you can see here in the graph, here we test the change in the stack voltage. So the current law makes it clear that the level has to fall to 60. The voltage has to fall to 60 within 60 seconds. But we can achieve this within 4 seconds, so that anyone can touch the vehicle from the outside. This is also a video, but it seems to be not working, so I'll just skip them. And it was mentioned earlier, but we were named as one of the 10 best engines of Ward's Auto, and the engine has also received another prize. These are some of the signature models. Hyundai Motor Group was the first to mass produce a economic vehicle named Tucson, and in 2014 Toyota's Mirai came out, and Honda's Clarity came out in 2016. And in 2017, Mercedes-Benz were supposed to bring out their new vehicle, but it has been postponed. So I think they were supposed to be supplied to a select number of users, but it was postponed. So I think it will be released into the market in the near future. And in 2018, Hyundai Motor Group released Nexo, and we also came up with a model for a European version and a US version. And in 2019 and onwards, many other automakers will be bringing out their own hydrogen cars and electric cars. So when we worked on Nexo, what we focused on was we were mindful of 4 different things. So efficiency, performance, durability, and hydrogen storage. So efficiency, the fuel economy is already, the efficiency for fuel cells is already high. So its system efficiency is around 60%, which is very high. So our goal was to increase this efficiency level even more, and we wanted to increase the zero back efficiency, and the lifespan of the batteries were supposed to be extended to be on par with that of combustion engine vehicles. And there is a separate standard that governs a hydrogen system. They gauge the amount of hydrogen inside each vehicle and calculates the weight per kilogram. And our goal was to bring this to a top-notch level globally. So we did a great number of tests. And in the case of efficiency, we tried to increase the usage of hydrogen and increase the efficiency of parts to increase the power of stacks. And we also made sure that these different parts, the valves, the components, consumed little energy as possible. And also another challenge was to maintain the density of hydrogen So we wanted to bring the performance up to the extent that it does not compromise the durability. And we were able to successfully control the levels to make sure that the Tucson hydrogen car's system efficiency was 55%. And since the fuel economy was high, when we compared it to gasoline cars, the fuel economy for Tucson was around twofold greater compared to gasoline cars. So this is what enabled us to extend the driving range. And another thing was we attached a 120 kilowatt motor. So if you have a chance to ride it, you'll be able to feel it. And we made sure that the car could cold start within a designated amount of time, even in minus 30 degrees Celsius. So and we also use a cold shutdown process to make sure that the air is let out and there's a certain level of humidity kept inside the car. And if the weather is too cold, this water is frozen. And so when you try to start the car, the water is not converted to hydrogen. That was the problem. And we tried to resolve this problem. And using our unique design and control technology, we made it possible to cold start the car in minus 30 degrees Celsius. So we did several hundred tests of the systems to make sure that there was nothing wrong with the parts. And when water freezes, its volume increases, which may lead to cracks or crevices in the catalyst. So we made sure that this doesn't happen as well. So this brought us to bring the durability up to 160,000 kilometers in 10 years. And when it comes to commercial cars, the standard has to be much higher. We have to advance it even more. So not only the pipes, but there's also the logic involved. And we are currently testing our vehicles to make sure that they are more durable. And the tank, I mentioned earlier that Tucson had 2 different tanks, which made it very costly in manufacturing, but we made sure that we attached 3 identical tanks, a unified 3-tank system. And in the case of Tucson, we mainly used imported parts, but for this model, we used domestically manufactured components, so the cost of production is very low, and the safety coefficient was around 2, more than 2. This is the internal structure of Nexo. So there's the engine room and driving motor and the high voltage battery. These are all installed as modules. And the fuel cell is attached below the trunk because we consider securing the passenger seat, enough room in the passenger seat, as a very important priority. So the high voltage battery and the hydrogen tank should not compromise the passenger's seat. That's why we attach them there. And besides being a zero-emission system, hydrogen cars, one of their advantages is that they can filter microparticulates in the air. When we first started developing it, this wasn't actually the goal from the start. If there's chemical components in the air, it could affect the platinum gold elements of our car. So we tried to filter that. That was the initial goal, so that we could filter the sulfuric oxide and nitrogen oxide in the air. And we found out that we could filter around 1 micro-sized particulates. But the PM 2.5 or small-sized micro particulates in the air can also be filtered through our cars, almost 100%.
이 차를 보통 우리가
So this car,
일반자가
if we run one car, just a typical passenger,
1년 동안 마실 수 있습니다.
this will have an effect of purifying the air that will be breathed by 2 adults in 1 year.
모든 동영상인데요.
We also have another video, but
미세먼지를 잡듯이
we just put in microparticulates here and filtered it with our technology to come up with clean air, but due to time constraints, I'll just skip this. And I just want to highlight the fact that during emergencies, or if there's a sudden demand for electricity, we can supply that through these technologies. And this is the last slide. I would just like to call upon Chungnam companies that eco-friendly cars or zero-emission cars, the various types of it, the hydrogen cars is the one area where existing automotive companies can participate. Because we have to increase the durability and cut the costs and develop more components. So more than 100 companies are already participating in the project. And if we use fuel cells, we can transform a car that looks completely like an existing car into an eco-friendly car. So from now on, not just us at Hyundai, but if we were to compete with other global companies, we need to improve the performance and develop more components. So I would just like to request that you join hands with us. And there are still components that we rely on imports, like sensors and other parts. So I would like to ask all of you to dedicate yourselves to that research. And after engaging in the assessment process for 3 years, I found out that the assessment method also lags behind in Korea. So we need to work on that as well. So that's why we are commissioning projects to many research institutions and automobile institutions. I just feel the need that there should be more done. So we need a special assessment institution. There is a hydrogen supply plant in Seosan. So if we could evaluate or test cars using their technologies, it would be very useful since they are also very closely located to us as well. So with that in mind, I would like to close my presentation. Thank you, Professor Park. Since this is we just had lunch, everyone may have had a hard time focusing, but thank you very much for bearing with us. We do have a little bit of time left. So I think these questions all came from one person, but I'll just ask one question to each of our presenters. And if we have the time, we'll just come back to ask other questions. So
audience ask you, in your Japanese government, suppose form to individual if someone wants to buy a fuel cell vehicle. Right? So government support for if your Japanese people wants to buy a fuel cell vehicle, personally, then how much support from the government? And the ask is from now on, how long the support from government will last? What's the question?
Okay. And yes, and Japanese government and also some rich municipalities and also have the subsidy for the purchase of the fuel cell vehicles, and not just the business fleet, but also the individual consumers. And for the Mirai case, of course, I think it was originally price tag was the 7 million yen. And then the government provided the 2 million yen and of the subsidy. And in the case of the Tokyo metropolitan area, and Tokyo government provided 1 million yen additional. So you can buy Mirai in 4 million yen. And some rich municipalities like Yokohama, they provide 2 million yen instead of the 1 million yen. And so you can buy that in the 3 million yen, which is the 30 million yen almost. And and the Mirai, well, when you see the picture, it looks like a small car, but it's not small. It's the E segment car, and so if you can buy that such a luxury car in 3 million yen, I think it's a good price. And so in that sense, I think that and subsidies were quite a strong supporter for the purchase of the fuel cell vehicle to the consumer.
At least it depends on the local government's amount. And how long does it last?
Yeah, that's the question. But and for the moment, and we still keeping such kind of the subsidy. And because I told them 2,500 on the street, but we see this is not enough. So maybe we have to continue this. Well, and first Mirai was released in December 2014. So perhaps within some years they will have a new model, and we have to see the price of the new model, and also then we have to perhaps the new model will be more and price will be more competitive. So government subsidy need to be justified for that. So maybe the amount of the subsidy will be decreased, but still some part of the support will be necessary. Well, that is maybe our experience with the subsidies for the NFR was also will be also useful. And please take a look at my slide, the amount of the subsidy also shown in that video.
Thank you. 질문하신 분 좀 되셨나요? 지금 대략 보니까 예를 들어가지고 700만 불 정도.
So he mentioned that there was the size of the subsidy was around 7 million won, but depending on the local government, the size of the subsidy it differs. So there is a difference. And I think he cannot clarify at the moment for how long the government subsidy will be provided. But what is for sure is that the cost of the cars is on the decline. So the size of the government subsidies will also be probably reduced in the future. Was that an answer to your question? We'll now move on to the next question.
Yes, that is indeed to Mr. Wang. We have one question for you.
The price of diesel consisted of tax, almost the half of the diesel. So in that case, the real price of diesel is the half of now the price of diesel. And in that case, also is it comparable for reducing the price of hydrogen to that amount compared to diesel?
So maybe I'll just clarify the question for those who missed it. I think the question was related to the price of hydrogen as it relates to parity to diesel. So perhaps I could just kind of clarify my earlier statement about parity. When we compare hydrogen with diesel, one of the important things is to compare it from an energy density equivalent basis, because we all know that hydrogen has more energy density than diesel does. But maybe just keep it more simplistic. If we take a more simplistic view, today most of the fleets that at Ballard, we're operating about we have about 40 Ballard-powered vehicles operating in Europe and the United States, and in China about 500 in total. And the cost of most of those fleets, the hydrogen price that operators paying, is about, I would say, on average, the range of $8 to $12 US per kilogram. Okay, and there's a lot of publications that has been around with US DOE and others that said that we need to get hydrogen down to about $5 US per kilogram to be truly competitive in a localized cost of energy perspective. So I think, I think we still have about half to go, just roughly speaking. And then I think this morning, one of the speakers, when we looked at the Japan hydrogen kind of roadmap, we're talking about getting to $2 a kilogram in the 2030, 2040 timeframe, which would, at that point, there will be no diesel. I think, we can be fairly certain of that. But I think, just to simplify the question, really, where we really need to is to look at getting down to from a current state of about $10 to about $5. That's the near-term goal. And then I think we have to look for ways as cheap green energy comes online and we have enough capacity, we're really trying to drive towards that $2 number.
어려운 일이지만 어쨌든 질문하신 좀 답됐으니까 모르겠네요.
A simple answer. I hope that satisfied your question. So at least the target that we are striving to achieve, the bullet, is the prediction from the user's perspective. So there could be many complicated factors at play. But of course, the target is the same, but each country, each jurisdiction have different methods to get to the target. But at this moment, well, we actually utilize various technologies to bring the cost down, but we will have to scale up ultimately to bring the cost down to make it more comparable to the fuels that is already valuable.
So the next question goes to Professor Park. We have two questions, but I'll only ask one. Since safety has become such an issue for us today, if a hydrogen car was parked in a parking lot, in the building's parking lot, and if it catches fire, does that fire get caught on the entire building as well? Does it spread? Or what happens? That was a question from the floor. So if inside a building, an indoor parking lot, if the hydrogen car exploded, does the fire spread to the building? I think that was one of the audience was concerned about that. Yeah, I think once hydrogen is emitted, the flame, I think the question was, doesn't the flame spread to the building? And what happens is, if inside a building, in the parking lot, there is a fire, if the fire extinguishing function does not work well, the fire spreads to the building. So are you referring to that? Or do you mean if hydrogen is emitted and this blob of hydrogen surrounds the car and then the entire thing catches fire? I think I need to add a few words to explain about this. So ever since we have been starting research into hydrogen technology, this was a very important issue because hydrogen is flammable, but there was a similar test that was done in Australia, and if I were to recall, if there is an accident, the hydrogen cars emits hydrogen within seconds and stops the fire, whilst the traditional conventional gasoline car explodes. So in that ad, the catchphrase was that hydrogen cars are safer on the condition that it is not in a sealed space. So we should make sure that where it is parked it has air circulation going on and that it is not completely airtight. So I think the same goes for buildings as well. So most of the buildings, even if it is indoors, it is open. It has air circulation, so you don't have to worry about it that much. But if the parking lot is completely sealed without air going in and out, then it may be a problem. I'm not sure, but depending on the structure, well, I think if the number of fuel cell cars on the street increase to around 1.5 million, we will have to solve that problem or make sure that does not happen, to make sure that the safety of the hydrogen car is guaranteed. We have time for one more question from the floor. Please use the microphone. So I was wondering whether so your question was, are fuel cells more apt for self-driving cars or electric cars? Well, I understand that, well, I'm a fuel cell expert, so I don't have that much opportunities to engage with autonomous vehicles, but autonomous vehicles consume a substantial amount of electricity. So in terms of energy consumption, hydrogen cars are more efficient, although there may be some personal differences. So I think that's why there is a greater focus on fuel cell cars as opposed to self-driving cars.
So usually first session after lunch are the toughest. But I'd like to all thank you for staying alive and staying awake until the very end. Thank you very much. That ends the first session. So thank you very much once again to the chair and the presenters for a good job done. And now we'll break for 20 minutes and we'll resume the second afternoon session from 3:30 in the afternoon. We prepare some snacks and beverages for you to enjoy at the hall. So I'll see you again at 3:30.